how does what you do, in terms of advocating for workers' rights, how does that affect small businesses that are just trying to survive?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We are, last I understand, slated to go on Saturdays in the Shoals here at about noon o'clock. So let's go ahead and dial in.
Hello, everyone. It's time for Saturday in the Shoals, and I am so fortunate I have Jacob Morrison on the line with Valley Labor Report. I have been looking forward to this conversation. I listen every week when they're doing all this conversation, all this talk about labor and rights and unions and workers and the value of workers and being appreciated and being paid for what we do and all that kind of thing. And I'm on the sideline going, yeah, that's right, and saying things like that. So I have an opportunity to talk with you this time and to be able to interact with you. So thank you very much for agreeing to take some time out of your Saturday to have this conversation with me live and in person. Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. I also have with me Adam Keller, and we are, what we do with our show is we have a whole second half of the program where we are online only. And so we're just, we're calling in from the second half of our show, streaming this to YouTube as well. So, so yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate your interest and your partnership over the last, I think we've been on WZZA for about 2 years now, or a year and a half. It's been a while. So definitely appreciate it and look forward to staying on WZZA for a long time to come.
All right. So now let me try to sound more professional. Okay. I'll just be honest with you guys. Everybody, I am on medication, so if I sound crazy, I'm going to blame it on the meds. But I'm really happy to have this conversation because it's been a long time coming. You've talked about strikes. You've talked about Amazon. You've talked about what has been happening not just around the state of Alabama, but across the nation. We've seen. I don't remember ever in our history us seeing a sitting president walk the line with workers who are demanding to be treated fairly. I applaud President Joseph Biden for doing that. I'm seeing some attention being paid to workers that we haven't seen in a while. For a while, it seemed as though there was this trickle down, all the rising tide will lift all ships kind of mentality going, and it didn't really trickle down to the average worker. So the middle class was being squeezed from both ends. And I'm seeing now a bit of a shift. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be really difficult. I mean, I think even opponents of labor recognize that this is a shift. And we've seen, in the business press, CEOs of major corporations really, running around kind of like a chicken with their head cut off, wondering about what to do about the moment that we are in, where, labor has close to a record approval rating. We have about unions, something like 70% of the American public have a positive view of unions. 90% of people under the age of 30, unions are, going on strikes more than we have in a long time, even though it's, compared to before 1980, still relatively low, but winning big things. The lowest paid workers at UPS are going to be getting a 50% raise over the life of the contract. Current temporary workers at Ford, with that tentative agreement that they just announced last week, if the members ratify that, they're going to be getting a 150% raise over the course of the contract.
Wow.
Second tier workers at Ford are going to be getting an 85% raise immediately if this contract is ratified. A lot of, public opinion is definitely in labor's favor. Labor is doing a lot to win. But, we still have a long way to go to turn this into something more sustainable. We still only about 1 in 10 Americans are represented by unions, down from a high of 1 in 3. And that is really, where we get our power from. The more people that join the labor labor movement and are a part of unions, the better that it is for everybody. And so there's a lot of work to do, but we're really in a pretty unique moment in my lifetime, certainly.
Well, one of the reasons that WZZA is so proud to be able to share with our listeners the knowledge that you guys drop every week is because we feel it's so important to educate the average person out there. We need to let everybody understand why it is that they want people who make things, who sweat, who roll up their sleeves and actually do the work, to be compensated for the time that they spend. We have been there's been this tendency to make rich people richer, and this money is going offshore somewhere. It's not being reinvested in our communities. But you have people who say, well, wait a minute, I can't believe they want, what did you say, 150% raise? That's outrageous. We need to explain why it is that it's important to see that the workers are paid fairly for their labor. Explain that, if you will.
Yeah, well, it's super easy to explain that, the 150% raise for the temporary workers, because the temporary workers are making like $15 to $17 to $18 an hour at Ford. And that's how, there's really been a division in so many, even union shops, between, legacy employees who have been there before. In particular, a big cutoff point was the Great Recession in 2008. If you started working at Ford before then, you're doing pretty well. Even now, you're having to work a lot more than you should have, frankly. But people that have started working after that, and certainly that have started working there recently, and they're temporary employees, they're being just completely abused by this massively profitable company. Hiring somebody as Ford.
It's different. Yeah, you're right. It's different if you got a small company that maybe can't afford to pay large wages. But if you've got a company they're making all kinds of profits, but not sharing them with the people who are helping them make the profits, it's vastly unfair. And I want us to do a better job, I guess, of explaining to the people out there who are shopping. They're spending money. They are supporting these businesses. They need to understand why it is that we need to work in solidarity with one another. So if you will, explain what a living wage is.
Well,
because somebody might hear you say, wait, $17, $18 an hour, that's more than minimum wage. Minimum wage is only $7.50 or $7.25, right? $7.25.
Right.
So explain what a livable wage is, a living wage.
Yeah, well, you started with with an allusion to, the consumer, and this is something that, employers really want to try to do. They want to try to get working Americans, working class people, to think of themselves as consumers instead of as members of the working class. And that's something that we really want to push back against, because you are in some ways, a consumer, but more than that, you're a member of the working class. And that's how, that's your power base, and how you can kind of affect change in society. And these are the people that you should have solidarity with. And most of the times, labor makes up a very small percentage of the product price. And so if you look at Ford, that's what we've been talking about. Less than 7% of the cost of the vehicle. You go to a dealership, you pay $70,000, $80,000 for outrageous price for one of these huge vehicles. Only 7% of that goes to labor. And so, wait. I want to make sure nobody missed that, because there was this, I read an article, and I want to say it was one of the Fords himself who said something, I hope we can come to an agreement. We don't want prices to go up for the consumer. We don't want people to have to pay more for their cars just to accommodate these outrageous wages that these folks are asking for. You said 7%. Yes. I don't think the average, I didn't know that. I bet the average person doesn't know that. Yeah, less than 7%, actually. And that's what they want to do, right? And because the cost, the UAW in their live stream, Sean Fain, every week has been doing a really good job of educating the people that are listening about how even if you're not a UAW member, your fight is much more, your interests are much more aligned with the UAW than with Ford. Prices at Ford have increased in the past 4 years since 2019, which is when they got their last contract. Prices have increased 40% for their cars. Wages have increased 6%, right?
Wait a minute, though, Jacob. Wait a minute. We had COVID. They couldn't get the parts. That's why the prices went up. That's the excuse. That's what I've heard. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Part of it certainly is, but I mean, we can look at analysis. All of the analysis basically at this point is showing that 50% of the increase in prices has gone not towards higher wages in a more competitive labor market, not towards, increased material costs or the supply chain stuff, but just directly to corporate profits. And the big three, and that's indicative in the big three, they have paid more to shareholders over the last 4 years than they did to UAW members. Like, think about that.
That's why your voice is so important. We need to understand that, and we need to be able to have these conversations in the grocery stores, in the barbershops, in the beauty salons. We need to be able to explain it so people don't think that workers are being greedy, because they're not. They're
absolutely, and you think, and people think of that. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And people think of UAW members and they think of typically, the legacy employees who do, to be fair, have it relatively well off compared to some people, at least, making $32 an hour or so. That's a reasonable wage. I think $30 an hour, you're starting to get towards this is a respectable, livable wage. Happy with that. Most people are happy with that. And even at these companies, at Ford, the CEO makes 300 times, not the lowest paid worker, the median worker, right? And then, people say, and so the retort to that is that, okay, look, even if you got rid of his entire $21 million salary, you're, if you distribute that across the 50,000 Ford employees, that's not going to be very much per employee. And that's fair enough. But he is surrounded by a horde of executives who similarly make salaries in the millions of dollars. And they are surrounded by hordes of shareholders who, like I just said, got more money from the company than the workers did, just because they own part of the company, right? Because they have money. And that's the that's really the divide in society. The people who, who work and the people who don't, right?
So if we were to try to create a new movement, and I'd like to see us do that, I've always felt that we should be more economically aligned, or as economically aligned as racially aligned. I think that there are times when we are divided and conquered on purpose, that there are these little bombs that get tossed into the crowd, and it's intended to distract us from what's happening. If we stop to think about it, we have way more in common, way more that aligns us than we know, and we really should be working in a concerted effort against those people who do not have our best interests at heart. So to that end, I would like to make sure that we are explaining our stances to the folks who should be thinking the way we do. And I want to make sure that we are having more of these kinds of conversations so that we can just make sure that people are clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. How do you feel about collective bargaining when it comes to maybe not shopping at a certain place until, do we get the average citizen involved? You're saying let's call them working class, not consumers. I'm saying that they're both. Do we say, hey, I'm a member of the working class, but they're not treating me fairly, so we're not going to shop with this person anymore. We're not going to buy this particular brand anymore until we get them to be more reasonable in their negotiation with us. Should we be doing more of that? Should we be boycotting?
Yeah, that's a great question of strategy. And by and large, when boycotts are not organized by the people that are affected, it is it is honest. It is more of the same as far as thinking of yourself as a consumer. How can I consume differently to make the world better? How can my consumer choices change the world? And that's just frankly, not going to do it. That's not going to cut it. As you're not going to change the world because you bought, this type of pizza versus that type of pizza. Now that as an individual, right? And now there are certain instances where boycotts can be effective, but they have to be organized. And we actually just finished a conversation with Thomas Ricks, who wrote a book, Waging a Good War, about how much military strategy and tactics were used in the civil rights movement. And, and so boycotts were obviously a big part of the civil rights movement, but they were not instituted because somebody got on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC and said, hey, let's all do this or not do this. It was because people in the community who were affected by the thing, said, we're all going to do this or not do this together. And then on top of that, there was the peer pressure against folks who did not abide by the community's, what the community had decided to do. Right? Yeah. So people who rode the bus in Montgomery during the boycott, there was some amount of coercion in the form of, ostracization or,
people shame you into doing the right thing. How dare you break the line here? How dare you go?
Absolutely.
And you see us all out here trying to accomplish something as a collective.
So
I think there needs to be. Go ahead.
Oh no, and so when there is a strike or something like that, like at a grocery store, a lot of Krogers, for instance, are unionized with the UFCW. So if the Kroger in your area goes on strike, and you've got and the workers have a picket line in front of the business, absolutely you should turn around and go somewhere else, even if it means going to a Walmart. And now you may think, well, that's strange because the Walmart, their labor practices are not at the, typically they would maybe even be considered worse than Kroger's. But the people that are being affected are asking you to do this. And it is a very easy thing to turn around and go and do something else. So I'm not one to, individually think about, you tally up, human scores and, is this company that much better, or do they, whatever. I go by what the people that are affected ask me to do. And so when workers are on strike and they ask for a boycott, I'll boycott. But other than that,
at the end of the day, if we change one company at a time, we're making a difference. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So wait a minute. Adam, you're on here too.
I am.
Weigh
yeah.
in. Weigh in. What do you think about the effectiveness of selective purchasing?
Yeah, I agree with Jacob there in that it has to be part of a broader strategy, and I also agree in terms of, is it the demands of the impacted folks? So I think, with a workers' picket line in a strike situation, it's very obvious, whose side you can be on, and it's as Jacob said, it's an easy ask. I think boycotts is something that we do need to look at as a movement, I think, more holistically, though, personally, because, as you said, we are both consumers and workers. And so basically, corporate America depends on us in both of those capacities, right? Our purchasing power as consumers definitely floats this economy. So I do think there has to be more strategic alignment in how we use our limited incomes, and how it aligns with our broader strategies as a movement. And so that's where I think I would love to see more of labor getting into alternative sources of wealth and looking at new types of businesses that we could go to beyond simply relying on corporate America. I think that's the toughest part, though, about a boycott is, and this speaks to, I think, a lot of the tough choices that so many of us face in this economy, is that for a lot of us, you're limited in what options you have, right? There may only be a Walmart. That may be the only place in town. Dollar General may be your only option in rural Alabama. And so we may know that Dollar General has terrible worker safety practices and terrible labor practices. We may know that they're kind of ripping us off as consumers. But then, what else do we do? And so I think that's a generational issue that we're dealing with now in a way that maybe we didn't deal with as much 100 years ago when folks had more sustainable communities, right? Where we could feed each other, we could look after each other's kids.
I think that's actually it. We feed each other, we help each other, and you and Jacob were both right in that we have to look at it more realistically and holistically. We have to figure out a way to make it work, and we can't be haphazard about any of these movements that we involve ourselves in. I'm thinking that maybe I remember when I was in high school. I remember I'd read a report in my economics textbook. And it was talking about how in some urban communities, the prices were higher. Maybe the quality of produce at a grocery store was lower. And I decided to check, and there was I'm going to just call them out. There was a company, the Wilson brothers owned Wilson food stores or grocery stores. They had several of them in several different parts of town. And there was one particular one that was in my neighborhood. Here I am in the black neighborhood, and I'm going in looking and comparing the price for a loaf of bread or a head of lettuce, and I'm noticing that it's higher in this part of town than it is over across town at the other store in the other neighborhood. And I asked one of the Wilsons, Mr. Wilson, why is it that it's more expensive here? And he came up with some excuse that didn't make a lot of sense, and it made me so mad. And I'm in high school. I stopped shopping at the grocery store in my neighborhood, and I started driving 5 miles just to get to the nearest grocery store because I was determined. And I know my action didn't make a big a ripple in the overall pool. I know it didn't, but it felt good to me. I felt that I was making a difference, and I told people this is why I refuse to go to the store around the corner, because they charge us more. I think that if we did more of these conversations, that more people would get on board, and then we do make much more of an impact. But that is exactly what Jacob's saying. We gotta make sure that we're being smart about it. We've got to make sure that we are communicating with one another and that we're acting as a collective instead of individually. All these individual fights aren't as impactful as if we all ball up our fists together. I want to know something. I know that you guys have touched on it. You've talked about it at length, as a matter of fact, but for somebody new who may be listening today, can you bring us up to speed on what happened with and what is now happening with Amazon?
Sure. So the here in Alabama, the latest is that there is a hearing scheduled for January. So you'll remember about a year and a half ago, there was a second election at the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer where and there was a second election because it had to the federal government ruled that it had to be rerun because Amazon had broken the law too much in the first election and interfered in the election too much by by really intimidating illegally the employees there into voting no. And so, the NLRB said, the National Labor Relations Board said that couldn't have been a fair election. There was too much coercion and retaliation and all of this kind of stuff. So you got to do it again. So that's what they did. And the second election, I think it was in March or April of 23, it ended again in a loss, but much closer this time, much closer the second time. I think it was 900 no to 700 some odd yes. So 55-45, I think, was the split. And then there are 400 challenged ballots. And so during the election process, during the election process, it was a mail-in election. Once they got all of when you get all the mail-in ballots in, you basically take a look at the ballot and you look at the name on the envelope, you know, they've got a secret ballot envelope inside of that. But first you got to validate, is this person a legitimate voter? Right. So I look at, you know, Lou Sally and I say, you know, Lou was not an employee during the election period. He can't vote. So, you know, his vote is now challenged. His vote goes into the challenged bucket. And so they set aside all of the challenged ballots. The union and the employer both have the ability to challenge votes, challenge the eligibility of the voter. And so there's 400 of those, and they haven't been investigated yet. They're being investigated now as to whether or not these voters were eligible. And there's supposed to be a hearing in January determining the status of these ballots and whether or not they'll be counted, and then counting the challenged ballots. So the challenged ballots could theoretically change the election and turn it into a win for the union. But it is also possible and probably more likely that it does not change the change the status of the election. In which case, it is possible that there could be a third run of the election because, like in the first time, Amazon again violated the National Labor Relations Act with respect to their employees' right to vote however they wish in a union election. And so the union has filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, and it's possible that, and that's another thing that the hearing in January is supposed to rule on, is whether or not the election needs to be rerun. So still kind of up in the air. And, you know, another story about that is important for folks to understand is that, you know, you might ask, why the heck is it taking so long to do this?
Right.
And that's because the National Labor Relations Board is just criminally underfunded. They have been basically flat funded since 2014. They got something like an 8% increase in the budget last year, but that doesn't even keep them up with where they were at the beginning of the pandemic before all this huge inflation set in. And so the National Labor Relations Board, I think at this point, has half the staff that it did 20 years ago, and they have more elections and a bigger workforce that they're supposed to be overseeing. And so you can imagine that that makes it difficult. There's a long line of stuff going on that they've got to investigate, elections that they have to hold. And that's the way that, you know, Republicans and their corporate donors want it, right? So, and so that's what's happening in Alabama. We of course know that, you know, the Amazon Labor Union, an independent union, won a union election, the first ever victorious union election at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York. Since then, they lost a second election in Albany, and there have not been any other Amazon elections that I'm aware of, I don't think. And so we're kind of in a limbo right now with the fight at Amazon. But as far as, you know, results or seeing any movement or anything like that, there are some Amazon delivery drivers out in California that are on strike. But you know, Amazon is very good at, you know, scaring people into, you know, not unionizing.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I'm wondering, Jacob, if the threat of these votes and the fact that the difference has reduced, and now you're looking at 55-45, so it's pretty close. Is the threat of this union causing Amazon to change any of their practices and get better?
So one of the things
are
that
they reacting in any way positively?
Yeah, some of the employees down in Bessemer in Alabama told us that they were actually no votes in the first one and then yes votes in the second election because of you know, because nothing has changed, actually. You know, they were told during the first election that, oh, you know, you give us another chance, right? Give us another chance as like an abusive spouse. Give me one more chance and you won't be sorry. And so several people voted no. And and then, nothing changed more or less. And so that, across the country, there have certainly not been any big changes to the working conditions of Amazon employees. They're still, by and large, making between 15 and 20 an hour, which is just not, that's fine for like a high school student or a college student, right? If that's your first job and you just want a little extra spending money or whatever, you don't have rent to pay, you live at home. But, if you're an adult, you've got to pay rent. God forbid you have a family. 20 an hour, 15 an hour is it's not enough. Certainly without a pension or good health care. And so, and that's why, there's so much discontent.
All right. So now I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. So for small businesses who are struggling just to survive, because we don't get the same incentives that large corporations do. We don't get those tax breaks. We don't get, all of these wonderful things that the government will do for. And I don't mean just the state government. I'm talking about city government. I'm talking about county government will do for these larger corporations because they're supposed to be job creators and whatever. But small businesses that are just trying to survive. How does what you do, in terms of advocating for workers' rights, how does that affect small businesses?
I think it affects them in the sense that I think that any worker has the right and deserves a union and collective bargaining and all of that kind of stuff. And but I say all the time that employees do not want to destroy the businesses that they work for. That would not even make sense from a self-interested perspective.
Yeah.
They want it to be sustainable, but they want it to do, everything that it can to have a good living for the workers that work there. And so one of the things that you'll during the collective bargaining process that employers have to do under the National Labor Relations Act, and this is another thing, actually, the National Labor Relations Act does not apply to businesses, does not apply to retail businesses if they have a gross annual income volume of business less than $500,000. So if you're a very small business, you're actually exempt from the NLRA, which I personally would disagree with. I think that anybody, if you employ somebody, then you should have to follow the rules as far as especially as it relates to a person's union rights. But, during the collective bargaining process, what employers have to do is they have to reveal their books where the information is relevant. And if you actually, as a small business owner, or even as a large business owner, if you're able to actually make the case persuasively that this particular thing you're asking for, employees, is not sustainable for us as a business, we will go under, then virtually in all cases, the employees will accept that and they'll not go after that as long as there's a good faith effort being made by the employer and being shown by the employer. And that's in fact what unions have done time and time again. In particular, we've been talking about the UAW and the Big Three. The UAW is blamed amazingly for the collapse of the auto industry, when in fact the UAW is responsible in large part for saving it because they were willing to take huge cuts to their pay, to their pensions, to their health care. They lost billions of dollars in compensation to save, on top of the taxpayers giving billions of dollars to the auto industry. And so, because the members of the UAW and the leadership saw the books and they saw that, you actually really do need us to take something of a hit. And so we will, because we want the company to survive. And so, that's what workers are willing to do to keep their businesses afloat. And because they,
I'm going to agree with that, because I know that my team here is wanting to do the best thing for the overall business because they understand how important it is. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I want to talk about AI. I want to know what your thoughts are about what's going on in Hollywood, what has been, what still is, and whether AI is going to be a factor is it something that we need to be concerned about as laborers across the board? Are we going to lose jobs to artificial intelligence?
I think that, it's difficult to say exactly how much of an impact a technology is going to have before it has the impact. But I think that almost certainly there's going to be some amount of automation with AI, and there's going to be some amount of hours of labor needed lost, right? You're going to need some amount of hours less of labor to create certain products. I think that's virtually inevitable. And I think as far as predictions go, that's one that I'm comfortable making. And so the only question for that is who is the beneficiary of it?
Right.
Labor has been typically self-interestedly just opposed to automation in general. They fight automation because they see rightly that it's going to result in job losses. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be that, if automation saves 10% of the time it's needed to create a widget, then the workers could create more widgets. Do what?
They could make more widgets.
Well, they could create more widgets, or they could retain the same salary and work less, right? Because that's another option, instead of it being the case that all of the productivity gains are taken by the people at the top. It just doesn't have to be that way, and so we could bargain it. We could bargain shorter work weeks in our contracts. That's something that the UAW has kind of put out there as an idea, and is something that people in Europe have fought for and won. 35-hour work weeks in many industries in Germany and France.
Yeah, I like that. Now we've improved the quality of life.
Exactly. We're improving the quality of life. We are giving more people more freedom. And the company is still making the same amount of revenue. I'm still making the same amount of money. It should be a win-win, but that's only if we are able to force that concession at the bargaining table. Because, of course, if left up to their own devices, they're going to take all of the extra profits, and they're not going to give us any. Exactly. And so we've got to make sure that we've got the power to force those concessions.
All right, but that means that we have to stay on top of it. We have to be as aware of what's coming down the pike as we possibly can. So we depend on you for that. We need to know what we need to be thinking about, what we need to be fighting for, what we need to be talking to our legislators about, our congressmen and women about. So thank you for staying on top of it and making sure that we're on top of it too. Really appreciate what you do. Is there something else that you know of that we need to be thinking about, we who are out here as part of the working class, and we who are out here as consumers? What do we need to be thinking about, worried about, concerned about, working toward? If you had a magic wand, what would you make us do next?
The magic wand, I would think that I would encourage people to do is to form a union in your workplace. The thing that one of the things that I've always found very persuasive is that, if we in America have, a very strong kind of democratic small d ethos. And so, when we see politicians, we think that, we should have a say in what they do and what our country does and what our government does. And yet, for the majority of our waking lives, when we clock into work, we clock out of our rights as a citizen. We give up all of the freedoms that we have as a citizen of the United States, and we enter into what is in many ways, like a dictatorship. And what unions do is they inject some amount of democracy into that relationship and give workers some amount of say in what goes on. And I think that's something that we all deserve. We all deserve a say in what happens in our life, and and things that affect us. And then by doing that, by unionizing your workplace and hopefully getting a good contract, then you become part of a movement that has been at the center of every freedom struggle in the last 150 years in the United States. And you can utilize your power in the community to do even more for even more people. So yeah, join a union.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in there to say that I think, when everyday people come together and unite around our common interests, we can really do amazing things. And so that's what I would encourage folks, is to always be organizing, to be having conversations with folks and building relationships built in solidarity with folks. And, be willing to fight for someone you don't even know. Be willing to show up for folks, and recognize that an injury to one is an injury to all. Because personally, I do believe that a better Alabama really is possible. I think interracial people power is the way we're going to get there. The vast majority of us are working class. The working class is the most diverse class. And as you pointed out earlier, Tori, there's been a lot spent to divide and conquer everyday working people, whether it's along race or gender, religion, nationality, so many ways in which they try to divide us and keep us apart. But we really do have a lot in common, because we all want a life of respect and dignity. We all want to be able to take care of our families and spend time with our families and come home safely to our families. We all want to have a community that's safe, where our kids can thrive, where they can be educated, and where we can have a better future that we provide for the next generation. Those are things that we can unite around, and there are concrete policies that we can enact in this state and in this country that could bring us closer to that vision. But it's going to take everyday people standing together from the bottom up, because that's so much of our history demonstrates that change comes from the bottom up, whether it's the civil rights movement, the women's movement, or of course our labor movement. It takes regular people who are listening, everyday folks. We have power when we stand together and we get to know each other and we have each other's back.
I very much agree with you. I do, however, understand enough of human nature to know that most folks are out there going, what's in it for me? How do I benefit from joining this fight? I think that to answer that, we have to figure out where our shared interests are. So I'm thinking, for example, of, there was an article in one of our local newspapers recently, actually a few months ago, talking about how small businesses are benefited by local newspapers. Newspapers are in trouble. They've been in a fight. A lot of their information has been used without compensation by social media, by the internet. And so you've got newspapers that are in trouble, that are folding. You've got radio stations that maybe don't have as much money as they could. But what you're doing with us, what Valley Labor Report does with WZZA, is we are benefiting one another. We're telling your story. We're giving you an opportunity to have a platform and tell your story. And at the same time, it's benefiting WZZA, because we're working together. I think that if we were to figure out how we can combine our fights, sometimes we would be that much more impactful. So I'm looking at ways that we can find something that you're passionate about and that I'm passionate about, and work together. And that way, everyone has skin in the game, and everyone is more likely to be actively involved in a more productive and positive outcome.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And an issue that comes to mind is like the environment. A lot of times people want to pit labor unions and environmentalists against one another, when these struggles are so interconnected, right? I mean, obviously, we all want a safe environment. We all want clean air. We all want clean workplaces that are safe. And so, I think it's easy for folks to get divided, but we really do have a lot in common. And I think, when we show up for one another, and recognize that, we all are going to have different passions. We're all going to have different, things that are pulling us in different directions. We all come from different backgrounds and perspectives. We all have our own struggles that we're going through. And I think that's worth really, reflecting on, is that the average person in this state, particularly in this state, in Alabama, in a place where things are as rough as they are, folks are struggling. They're going through a lot. And so all we can do is try to show up for one another and make ask of people that are reasonable, and see if we can just get them to move up one step closer to us, right? And every little step, and build on that, and go from there. But I think it is really, really important, though, that folks are able to work together and not separate themselves into silos. That, oh, well, this is my issue and that's your issue, and you do your thing, I'll do mine. We have to collaborate as much as we can. We have to cooperate as much as we can, and actually communicate with each other. And even if we don't agree on strategies or tactics, if we can find areas where we recognize we're both trying to move the ball down the field when it comes to a better society.
I very much agree. I want to say amen. I want to take a collection. I think that was very well said. Thank you so much, Adam. I am. There are so many things that you guys cover. I kind of like to get into the nuts and bolts of how you put your show together. How do you decide what the topic's going to be, who the guest is going to be week to week? There's so many important things to talk about. How do you decide what's going to get the attention any given week?
Well, one thing that makes it a little bit easier for us is that we do try to keep it pretty tight to union stuff. And so now you can take a very, very large view of what is a labor issue. And we do sometimes, because, who does everything in the country affect more than any other class? Is the working class. Working class people are affected by virtually anything, any issue that you can think of affects workers in some way. And so you can definitely take a very broad view, but we do typically, and we do that sometimes, but typically we stick pretty narrowly to a traditional kind of labor, what is a labor issue? And so that narrows it down for us quite a bit. And when we are in moments like we are today with the UAW struggle, that makes it certainly very easy as far as the programming, what to cover, what kind of guests to get. But there's always stuff going on that we can cover. And so, there are some times where we have guests planned out months in advance, just because that's when our calendar and their calendar works together. But we have a couple of segments that we do, Last Week in Southern Labor and Boss Watch, where all that we do is really pull from government websites, about what's going on, and give like a super kind of quick bullet list about those issues, and then the ones that we decide to dive deeper in. We definitely prioritize Southern stories, what's happening in the South, because, of course, we're a Alabama union radio program. So if it's happening in the South or it's happening in Alabama, then we're a whole lot more likely to talk about it, to try to get a guest on to talk about it. But, the driving theme of the show is that we want to educate folks about, the power that they have to make their lives better, and how people are doing just that across the South and across the country. And so we try to, that's basically, how we, and so we see, what comes across our social media feeds, what comes across in the news outlets that we read, and we try to dig into things that are interesting to us and that we think that our audience would be interested in as well.
And if you haven't noticed, Jacob is pretty good at just riffing off this, and so I can chime in when necessary. But we live and breathe this stuff. We are just passionate members of the labor movement, and we've been activists for years, and so some of it's just, this is what we do, this is what we believe, this is what we're about, this is what we do throughout the week, and so it kind of comes natural. And then some of it is, the prep process that he outlined, and we're volunteers. We we have full-time jobs outside of this. This is just something we do as a passion project. And so sometimes, it just depends on the week, on how busy we've been, and, how much we just kind of go off the dome versus, very scripted. But we just try to put out a quality product that folks, enjoy, and we try to make it accessible to folks, and not talk down to folks, but really, share information and share knowledge that folks will find useful. And even if they don't like what our opinions are, they don't necessarily like our politics, hopefully they at least feel like we respect them as listeners, that, we are trying to put out something that is beneficial to folks. And hopefully that comes across.
And, it's also been helpful as we've gotten, modestly larger. We're coming up on 1 million views on YouTube. And so people are seeing us, and they are asking us to be on the show. They are pinging stories for us. And that person that I just talked about, Thomas Ricks, author of Waging a Good War, their publicist reached out to us. We had never heard of the book before, never heard of the guy before, but he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and his publicist asked us to be on the show. And so, that's been helpful in the last year as we've gotten, just a little bit larger online.
Right. It's been amazing the connections we've made with so many folks. I mean, here we are, we're talking with WZZA. We've talked with, we're on a conservative station, WVNN. We have had guests from all over the country, all over the world, even some international guests. We've had people in very high offices, and also just rank and file working folks, and everything in between. People with PhDs, people who write with big bylines and these big publications, but also just, activists in our community. And so that's been the most satisfying thing for me in this project, is just the connections that we've made, and getting to connect other people to other folks who care about making things better. And that's, if we can accomplish anything else, that's it. Just connect folks.
I've listened to your show so often, and you seem to have sensible people on there. I'm curious as to how you would respond to someone who maybe is coming from an entirely different camp, with an entirely different point of view, someone who maybe is wanting to get on your show and debate with you to advocate on behalf of those fat cats who are making all the money, as opposed to the workers who are out there making the products that are selling. I'm wondering how you would react to someone who wants to get on and say, but wait, my pillow guy, wait,
Right.
I'm poor too. I need you to go fund me so I can pay my attorney because I'm being sued for all these things. How would you react to someone like that who would like to weigh in on your show?
Jacob would love it. I would probably be less inclined. My approach would be different.
Yeah,
I move from the room with him.
Yeah, I do enjoy I enjoy debate, and how I would treat my interlocutor would really kind of depend on how much where they're coming from, and how much respect I have for them as a person, right? If it's just like if it's like a conservative union member, right, who's calling in, and we have those for better and for worse, and they're asking my perspective, I'm going to be very comradely in my discussion with them, and that kind of thing, and I'm typically very respectful of anybody, if I'm talking to them, if I'm having a discussion with them on their show or mine. But depending on how belligerent they get, I would be willing to get belligerent as well, or how silly their argument is. But I and we have had a few. There's not very many times that we do that because, we just, we only have so much time, right? And so we have to decide
and we don't
how much.
Waste it with
I don't want to. How much time do I want to give to a crank who's like, oh, won't somebody think of the CEOs, right? But but it's not something that we have never done. We've had Republicans on the show to talk about. In particular, we had the fella. I don't know if you remember that anti-protest law that they tried to push in the last session. Yeah. We had the author of that bill on the show, and we talked to him for an hour.
It was something else.
It was something else, yeah.
Yeah. I've had some very interesting conversations with some of our elected officials from this area about some of the stances they've taken, from everything from that anti-protest to making it more difficult for someone to vote. It's absolutely ridiculous, and,
Right.
and we've got a lot that we need to unpack in coming months about that. You know, we've got an election year coming up next year, but I wanted to jump to something else right quick before I lose you guys. You've got you just mentioned that there are conservative union workers. There may be someone out there who kind of veers to the other side, who thinks, wait a minute, I'm a Republican and I'm a union worker. You're going to have your iron workers and your electricians and all these different people who may have different points of view. How do you herd the cats? You guys are union, so you're trying to get everybody to work together and for one collective goal. Yeah. So how do you make sure that everyone's voices are heard, and that they keep their eye on the ball, so that we all remember we're all really members of one team? How do you do that?
I don't. Adam, I'm interested in what you have to say, because Adam has had a lot more experience in that specifically, a lot more actual like real world experience. He was the staffer for the AEA in Huntsville, representing like 1,500 teachers, and I don't know how many teachers in Alabama, but contrary to what you'll hear on like conservative talk radio, they're not all Marxists.
Right.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
I think building relationships based in trust is huge. And the labor movement is very diverse ideologically. The working class is very diverse. And so, we have folks who belong to labor unions and maybe will agree on certain aspects of fighting for a good contract, for example, or representing their coworkers against abusive practices at work. But then when it comes to maybe social issues or cultural issues, there's a lot of, dissension. And I see that a lot in our movement, where there is, dissent and division to some degree between, maybe more progressive folks and more conservative folks, particularly when it comes to issues like race and gender, policing, criminal justice. Those issues can be very divisive. And in fact, we've kind of gotten in trouble with some union folks before. We've gotten pushback from folks for some of the stances we've taken, but we try to look at, what is best for working people, and what is a policy's impact on them. What is a politician's actions impact on them? What is, a police officer's actions impact on them? But how is a regular working class person impacted? And we stand with those people, and we try to take our stances based on that, and listen to folks and try to build respect and have good conversations around it, recognizing that it's not always going to work. But when you fight for folks, even when you disagree, you can build a lot of power and relationships there. And I had success with folks who disagree with me politically, but were willing to show up to me at that school board meeting, or willing to show up and sign up a new member, or take an action and write their legislator, even if they didn't agree with me about immigration or didn't agree with me about abortion. But we could find common ground, and through that, hopefully build, the foundation for future collaboration, and see where it takes us.
You know what? That makes so much sense. And I'm thinking, because I was so frustrated, and it breaks my heart sometimes, because I think that people sometimes vote against their own self-interest because they are distracted by those red meat topics like abortion, or like gay marriage, or like immigration, or whatever. And sometimes we forget that really that's not the focus. That's not what we should be worried about so much. That is not what is going to impact my family or my life or my home or whatever. And we need to be thinking about, voting for those things and those people who stand for us and who will actually impact our own bottom lines. And so we can't be distracted by those other topics. But they've been very effectively used by one party in particular to divide and conquer us. So we've got to remember that we stand together for a reason, and that it's important for us to continue to do so. And you've helped to make that happen by having these conversations today. I'm so grateful to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tori. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
All right, I want to do this again, and when I'm not all matted up, so we can even maybe stay on some topics. But I think that we covered quite a bit of ground today, and I've actually been taking notes while I've been talking with you. So I'm going to be revisiting some of this. But I want to thank you for the information that you've shared. I want to thank you for what you do every week for us, and for giving us a chance to just kind of eavesdrop in on your conversations. Jacob, keep fighting the fight. Adam, keep him straight and keep him out of jail. Make sure you keep the bond money just in case you have to go fetch him out of jail sometime. I will do the same. I thank you all for listening, all of you out there who are listening to WZZA Radio, and I thank the Valley Labor Report for this conversation today. All right. This has been Saturday in the Shells on WZZA.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.